Well, welcome everyone. My name is Isabel Jeniches. I'm a co-founder of the New Mexico Healthy Soil Working Group. Today, we're so happy to welcome our guest, Casey Holland, a really great no-till farmer in Albuquerque, urban farmer. And we've been waiting to have her on the show for a while, so we're really psyched that she's here. We had the great fortune to visit her farm actually twice in the last couple of years. And so we were able to firsthand see the progress that she's made, incredible progress, going from a really dilapidated urban lot to a thriving urban farm in just a couple of years. And really following the soil health principles and having those as a guiding star for her operation. And in addition to that, she's also really community-minded, trying to pay her workers well, which is not always easy for a young beginning farmer, and justice-oriented, and again very much including the community into her farm planning and into her business planning. So really, I think a model for all that we talk about when we talk about regenerative agriculture, which is ideally so much more than just soil health, but it's also refers to social values and community values, reconciliation and healing with the land and with relationships. And so with that, I'm really pleased to give the mic to Casey. So thank you so much, Casey, for being here.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. And thank you so much for everybody who wanted to come this evening and share some space with us and hear what I have to say. I'm very grateful and honored. And I just want to acknowledge too, as we're going through all of the things that I've done in relation to the land over the years, that much of the work I've done is just building on this incredible legacy that we have as a people, particularly here in so-called Albuquerque, in so-called South Valley, right? So I am just honored to be able to continue the legacy of land stewardship on this stolen land here. It's originally Tewa territory, and be carrying on those principles of stewardship in ways that respect the earth, respect each other, and try to reconnect us to that. And these practices have been practiced for many thousands of years prior to settler colonialism. And I am just so grateful to be in conversation with the land. And I never want to forget too that it's kind of funny, all of these principles, I guess it's been more formally put together the last few years, but I definitely came to these practices through just listening, acting, listening again, and then responding from there. So it's kind of this like continual feedback loop, and just really going for what feels good, both for the earth and for myself and for the people here. And it was really sweet when I started learning more about the soil health principles to realize, like, oh, just by doing those simple steps, just listening to what feels good and going for that, we started hitting every single one in this beautiful way. So yes, thank you again for the intro. And I'm really looking forward to kind of going through how we did it and where we started and where we are now. It's been a really wonderful process. So if you wouldn't mind pulling up the presentation, that would be amazing. Thank you. Yes, next slide. So one of the things here, I'm running Chispas Farm, which is a 4-acre. We were certified organic. We are now formally certified organic. We can get into that later. But we still farm organically, and I even like to think better than organic, no offense. And we are located here right off of Bridge and Isleta, so we're hyper urban, maybe like 10 minutes from downtown, not even, on this beautiful 4-acre lot that historically was maybe in the 70s. It was like an auto shop and like a small scale, so people had some sheep on it. And then prior to that, my understanding is that this whole neighborhood was a big like melon and chile farm prior to that, and the Saavedras owned most of that. And then many of my neighbors actually are of the Saavedra heritage. We are on Saavedra Street, and one of the brothers from a street named Brothers lives right down the road. So that's been really sweet. And I haven't been able to get too much information about the specific Pueblo peoples who may have worked this land prior. However, I am always open and interested in learning some of that land. And in more recent history, this farm was started originally in 2001 by this woman named Kathy in partnership with the farm owner, John Sparks. And she got some of the basic infrastructure installed. So that was like making fences and putting in some underground irrigation pipe. And then it was farmed for almost a decade by this couple, Eli and Amanda. Some of you may have heard of them. Chispas used to really be known for garlic. That was like their thing. And then by the time I came on, I started working with this land in 2017. It had been left, I'd say, for a few years. It had just kind of been abandoned and rather neglected and really didn't look like much. And a little bit about myself. So I've been farming for 10 seasons now. This is my 10th season, specifically in Albuquerque. I was born in Albuquerque and raised in southern New Mexico. And I like to call myself a regional specialist because I've really only farmed within a 3-mile radius of this exact spot those whole 10 years. So it's been a really sweet way to build relationship with this place. And coming on to Chispas, I was definitely a little intimidated because it was my first time really ever managing a plot and leasing land in a way that I was kind of like in control of it, that I had a say in what was going on. And like many empty lots that you see here in town, I drive by all these empty lots and I just see their potential. Really, it's incredible. It was pretty full of weeds and overgrown and barren. That's like, I think the number one thing I noticed when I first got here, just how barren it was. And there were piles of debris. You know, we kind of inherit a property legacy, we'll say. So all those kinds of things. So when I came on in 2017, and I advocate this to anyone who is thinking about starting a new farming venture, is always just try to spend that first season, if you can, getting to know the space and kind of allowing yourself to settle in it and allowing yourself to see, where does the sun go? You know, how does the rain fall? Like, what is it actually like being here? Where do you naturally gravitate towards? Where do you maybe not visit as much? Like, it was a very sweet intention setting process that first season, clearing through debris piles, like kind of resetting the energy feel of the space and salvaging what I could from those different debris piles, and realizing and trying to figure out where the fields were, or how maybe they would make sense to be laid out. And this picture here that we're looking at is maybe about, I want to say 5 months into that journey. And it was quite the task, right? With these fields that had been left, and they were big and they were kind of like wonky shaped, and there were a bunch of dead trees on them and everything. And of course, everyone said right when I came on, take pictures, take pictures, take pictures. And I was like, well, there's nothing to take pictures of. And of course, now I realize the nothing was something. And a lot of these pictures actually start a little more into my journey, so you don't get quite to see what exactly it looked like when I started. But this is a pretty early shot. And in addition to clearing debris and kind of figuring out the flow of the space and opening up space that wasn't there just simply because it was covered or had giant trees on it or what have you, like dead trees and things. I was also trying to figure out where the fields were and trying to clear those out. And we are I'm very grateful to have access to acequia irrigation on this property, which was very key in doing one of the very first steps that I knew. I'm not like a chemist. I'm not really like a soil scientist, right? I get like a soil test done and I'm like, this is all Greek to me. I do not understand other than the basics. I figured, well, what will tell me how the soil's doing is if I grow a cover crop on all of these fields that I can. So that was my process in the fields, is as I was deciding where our boundaries would be, where our edges would be, I was starting to establish cover crop in these fields. So this picture in particular that we're seeing was an early shot of, we've kind of got the first 2 fields set and like a baby. I think I did a Piper sedan grass sorghum my first season, primarily because when you research that, you can plant it late. And in my clearing process, I wasn't able to get this in until about June, right, which is a hard time to get anything to come up but Sudan grass loves the heat. So we were able to get some, I got a whole thing of Sudan grass. And my idea was, is if I plant an identical cover crop, just get biomass, get something covering the soil as much as possible, then the cover crop will tell me what fields are the healthiest, what fields need work, what fields are struggling. Maybe they're, and I didn't know if we'd be dealing with contamination issues or poor drainage or all these, got no idea. And it was amazing in that setting process and in that growing that uniform cover crop. It really did tell me so much about where I could then focus my agricultural intentions as far as growing food the following season were. And since then, we've kind of built on that. So this is kind of like a preset. We were getting ready to plant cover crop in one of the back fields where now there's a giant hoop house, which is really fun, but that's for later. So next slide, please. So this is a shot of a field that I feel really proud of. So this is one of the first irrigations I remember being in awe of, because I had done a second irrigation at the farm I was at prior, but not too much. It wasn't really a practice. So it was so sweet, and you could almost hear the earth sigh a breath of release as it was getting that sweet, sweet, deep irrigation from the cover crop. So this field in particular has come a long way. Next slide, please. And this field, we now have an entire barnyard on. This picture was taken literally 5 days after irrigation. So that is kind of through doing the flood irrigation and through trying to establish the cover crop, I saw real quick, where did the water drain? Where did the water not drain? This area was a particular problem child, and I was really glad to find this picture because I was like, nobody believes me that this beautiful barnyard space was once like a duck pond for a while, then it became like a mosquito braining nasty pond. Turned out we probably could have started a pottery on it. That whole field is like pure clay. And I knew to avoid that, right? We do not want to try to grow vegetable crops on that. That wasn't the spot. Next slide. So this is like maybe a month, probably about 30 days after that irrigation, and it started to come up. And what I really liked seeing too is you could see where it was really spotty, right? So some areas of the field with that uniform cover crop came up really, really well, really, really strong, uniform, look like sexy little seedlings. They just look so good. You love that grass. And other spots were like, oh, wow, that doesn't look as good as the rest. That's so interesting. So this is kind of the area near where that duck was swimming prior. Next slide, please. And this is one of the better fields, right? Like you can see right away. And what I love too, and you can't really get in here and see, but on the back left where the grass is taller in the back, already you can tell where that Sudan grass is uniform and strong in the front part of the field. On the back left edge, it's kind of yellowing and shorter and doesn't look quite right. And we kind of out of desperation needed a field, and that was like not as bad as how some of the other was looking. We decided to grow on it, and really looking back on this picture, I was like, oh, right away, that Sudan grass was telling us how unhealthy that portion of the soil is, because it too suffers from some really, really interesting, super heavy clay issues that we're still kind of grappling with and trying to form. So that spot in particular is still an issue. And if I had just listened to the grass more, I would have known that instead of trying to grow on it. And the rest of it was just so freaking beautiful though, and came along really well. Next slide. And this is it about, like another few weeks later, just kind of a progress shot, finally got a good establishment in. And the whole time too, while you're doing this, like I was kind of seeing too where I naturally gravitated, how it felt. You kind of see like life come back to it, right? And that's where like the feeling of things go from, right? When you approach like a barren field, it just like isn't nice to be around. Like listen to that. What doesn't feel good? Like you want to do something about it. So just breathing myself that sigh of relief along with the earth when it was getting the water, as you see things growing and you start seeing insects coming back and you start seeing like it actually doing something like for itself, right? Like I'm not going to get a harvest off of this cover crop, but just the fact that we're covering the soil and it feels nicer to be out there was like a huge step that I knew, okay, yeah, cover crops are good, but how are they good? Like holistically in my soul, you could tell just by looking that it was good and that the earth was like happy from that. Next slide, please. And this is really sweet. So this area, we kind of played around with some annual cover crops for a few years. This is probably 2 seasons later. And we were doing the annual kind of like you have to mow it, and you have to till it under, and then you have to rebroadcast. So this area was right before we planted a perennial cover crop, because finally we decided, okay, these areas aren't the best growing spaces. They do have heavy clay. They're not really thriving. However, we are going to potentially bring on some livestock in order to graze and everything. And we really want to set this and not have to just like keep killing everything every year also, which doesn't really feel good when you go back to that bare soil after like having so much life. So this spot we targeted as an area that we wanted to plant the perennial cover crop. And on the next slide, you'll kind of see what it looked like here about 4 months later, which was incredible. And in here, there's like a bunch of different, we planted, thanks to Kevin Brownham, I think his name is. He may have been on this prior. He is like a really like a seed expert. I don't even know what to call him. But he was just so knowledgeable on helping us meet our needs, because so many people deal with existing pasture, don't really know what they're doing. And I was really able to talk to him about our specific needs. Like we need it to be drought tolerant. We need it to like heavy clay. We need it to be both a mix of perennial and annuals. We need it good for grazers, specifically milk animals. We need it to be able to handle only getting water every 2 weeks, if that. And like magic, he gave us this mix, and some things took really well in some areas, which is always interesting. I want to do more research into like what took well where. Other things didn't really take. And this season now, it's just freaking incredible. Next picture, please. Oh, I must have skipped it. So there was this one picture where I just had this picture of these peas and all these different grasses, and it's just like so beautiful. This picture, actually, what I really like is from just last season. So over the years too, I figured out how to integrate the cover crop into our winter production. So this field, as you can see, it's got a winter rye. This is probably in January. This picture was taken. It's got a winter rye planted where our sweet potatoes previously were planted, because it's really sweet timing. As soon as you harvest the sweet potatoes, there is enough time to plant a cover crop, put drip lines back on it, and have a really nice established grass by the time winter hits. And you can see all that organic matter covering the paths is all of the sweet potato debris that we flail mowed. I've got a picture of our lovely flail mower here later. And that was something too that we just kind of like started to develop more by listening and by seeing. In past years and past farms, you know, a crop comes out and it's like towards the end of the season anyway, and you just leave it. But I was like, you know what, if I'm already out here, and I don't really like how it feels when it's just barren and empty, that doesn't seem right? Like we might as well just quickly throw in some seed. And what was really great too is we didn't have to till, we didn't have to do anything for that cover crop to come up, because we had disturbed the soil enough just harvesting the sweet potatoes. It was literally broadcasting some winter rye seed over the top, gently raking it in and putting the drip lines in. And look how beautiful that came up. And then our sheep were able to graze, have fresh grass in January. How bonkers is that? You're able to graze that and love on that. And that just like helps keep them healthy and all these things. Anyway, I could go on for days. Next slide, please. So one of the things we did, and I'm giving, just to credit all this stuff, I'm giving a presentation for the Organic Farming Conference this coming Monday, specifically around our practices, because again, I could talk about this for hours, but over the years of doing cover crops and amending with a lot of compost and adding all the organic matter back to the soil and mulching and just all these things, right, grazing the animals, there was this point where you could tell the soil was changing. Like dirt is dirt, it's just dead. It's like the stuff you get on your jeans. Like if you look out and you see a bare field half the time, it's just dirt, right? Like there's nothing really happening on it. There's no life. Whereas one year in the spring, we started to get out there and I was like, something's different. Like it feels alive. And we got a soil test, which I had done at the very beginning. And we got like half, I think that the thing I could really understand was like the organic matter measurement was like 0.5%. I went ahead and I was like, you know what, let's just like see what's happening here. So we got a soil test and it came back and it was like, you have 8% organic matter. Your nutrients look great. And I was really challenged, honestly challenged, because I was conventional in my way that I was just like, you know what, this bed is empty, the crop is out. I am going to just till it under, like make like 5 passes with the tiller, just like get it to look real nice, right? And then we're going to amend it. We're going to add compost. We're going to add the fertilizer. We're going to till it again. Like I was just like an over tiller, not going to lie, right? We're all on our journeys. This was satisfying to see that, well, we're at 8% organic matter. Like I had justified my tilling because I didn't have soil, and you can't just like compost mulch in the desert. That like it does not work. It just like dries out, nothing grows. I had justified using the tiller because I needed to incorporate and actually mix with the native soil all these amendments that I was adding. And then all of a sudden we get back and it's like, oh, my nutrients are doing great. Like my organic matter is skyrocketing. Like I actually don't need to add anything. So like, how do you prep a bed when you don't need to add anything? What is that? And so that, like, this was literally last season, 2020. Yeah, spring of 2020. It was like, okay, well, shoot, I better figure out a completely different way of even bed prepping. Like I was doing it good, you know, like it looked good prior when I was still tilling. But this was the shift, and this was the day, and this was like such a momentous occasion where I was like, I guess we're getting a broad fork, which is what that picture is of. It's like a meadow creature, 10 out of 10, do recommend. They are amazing. It's like a 16-incher. And I was like, oh, look at that. Like we can deeply penetrate the soil in a way that's not completely literally destroying everything underneath it. We're aerating. My little sprinkle of compost and like some on-farm made like animal manure compost is able to then kind of like, we sprinkled it on top and then we kind of puncture it with a broad fork and it kind of like sinks in that sweet way. And then in 2020, I'm not gonna lie, we hand hoed all of these bed. It was a little ridiculous. I had to like reassess just like how much life energy I wanted to give to hand hoeing the bed clean and then raking it off. But next slide, please. This was like such a fun process, and you can see like some areas where the cover crop didn't quite come up as good for that winter, other areas it did. This like beautiful grid that we were able to make just with the broad fork and like this way that was just like so sweet. Next slide. And one of the fun things too about broad forking is that it can be kind of like a little dance. Like we are doing 80-foot beds. We actively cultivate about 2 acres in vegetables. At the beginning of the season, we broad fork every single square foot of bed at the beginning of the season. It takes a while. You have to have forethought. You have to plan. It is like a workout. I kind of like to think about it as like, you know, you lose all your muscles that like first month of winter break. It's like a good way to get the muscles back at the beginning of the season, and it's a good way just to kind of reset and kind of like reopen the soil and aerate it from there. And you can see we got some little baby shallots coming up in those other beds, the cover crop and the paths that we seeded the winter before. Oh, it just feels so good. And what was incredible, I think, about once we switched to the broad forking was like all these shifts started happening. Like if I thought the soil was getting better with all my amendment and all my tilling and all of that, once I stopped tilling, things just went off. I had no idea what to do. I was like the most scared I had ever been. You know, like farmers, we get stuck in our ways because like you do something and it works and you know it works, and like you can't bet the farm on something not working. Like that is a scary prospect, in particular when you are trying to like pay your people fairly and like make sure you can cover your own bills and like still afford like all the things that you need. So this was like a terrifying moment, and let me tell you, 10 out of 10 would recommend. It was worth it. There's a lot of caveats to that. You have to get to the point where you have soil in order to steward it, in order to care for it, in order to get to no-till, particularly here in New Mexico. And we did it. We're here. It's so cool. Next slide, please. And this is kind of what our conventional bed prep would look like. So, and I already, like I said, I was tilling, but like I was doing it pretty well. You can see all the organic matter in there. Just kind of dead though. You can see there's like less life overall, even doing it well. Like it's absurd. Next slide, please. And this too, right? This is the conventional tilling. So this is, and we're not like killing anything. It's like the soil still is like pretty in its same texture. Here we've tilled, we've made like 3 passes, right? Everything's like over aerated. It's like fluffy. I used to look at that and think like, damn, that is good. Now I'm like, oh, wow, we did that. We like ripped that stuff to shreds. Yeah, it looks pretty and fluffy. But like at what cost? At what cost now is what I'm realizing. Next slide. Yeah, so this is one of my favorite tools. So I also, one of the first things I did here, which I acknowledge if you're on a larger acreage, you do need to use a tractor sometimes. We do it all by hand and with the BCS. And one of the first implements that I ever got, even still while tilling, that I 10 out of 10 recommend is this beautiful flail mower. It will turn all of the debris that is on the field into this beautiful mulch. At one of my old farms, I was taught that like if you at the end of the season, when everything's dead, you just have to like pull it off and then like literally take it to the dump. And I was like, this doesn't feel good, but like this is really the only option I feel like I have in order to deal with all this like crop residue, in order to prep, in order to get ready to plant. This flail mower, it's incredible. I'll like flip my camera around. I'll show you some of these things. I swear to you, I wish I could show you. It will take these giant ass hedgerows of like amaranth and all these things and turn it into a beautiful, shredded, picturesque mulch that just so easily reincorporates back into the soil. Even if you're still tilling, it's worth it. And it will help you get to the place where you don't have to till anymore, which is just so sweet. Next slide. And this is my new bed prep, right? So instead of hoeing everything by hand to get the beautiful seed bed that I thought, we did invest this year in a power harrow, which has been a game changer. So we're still broad forking. We are still amending with just our on-farm animal manure-based compost with the chickens and the goats and everything. But you saw some of those pictures before, right? Where everything's just like pristine dirt. Again, even though it was like more alive than it was, it's still pretty much dirt as a good color, but it's still dirt. To this, where it's like literally we grew 3,000 pounds of onions on this bed, all on these 10 beds. This is only 10 beds, 10 80-foot beds. We grew 3,000 pounds of onions on these 10 beds with no-till, and this is what it looks like now when I flip the bed, so to speak, right? When we have just flail mode, we removed all the onions, we flail mode. I did the power harrow once. There's so much juicy organic matter everywhere. And you have some drip lines on it. I'll flip my camera around here in a second so that way I can show you like what it looks like with the drip lines. And we're going to be planting into that tomorrow, all our little baby cabbages and our little robs, all those things. And you could just really tell like the life that is there. And it is just so incredible to see like how literally all that biomass that the field grows, like it wants it back and it's so good for it back. And that's kind of creating that nutrient cycle that everything we take from the farm, we can give it back. We can give it right back. And then it is able to take care of itself more and more and more every year. It's so wonderful. I think that's the last slide. And because it's the last slide, oh no, this is actually a really sweet photo. So this is just one of those community pieces. In 2019, this sweet elder, Procopio, brought his nephew almost every day. He's going to be the future farm foreman. Trust you me, Davian. This is kind of a sweet picture of just what it looks like with the living paths is what we practice now. So instead of hoeing or killing all the weeds in the path, I really prioritize keeping everything alive, and we just manage it with a line trimmer or a lawnmower now instead, and then everything growing in between. And I think just to be mindful of time, that way we can start conversations, I'm just going to start the more active part of the tour, if that's okay. Am I able to share my camera here? Nice. Okay, here I'm going to flip her around. So one of the things we did too is all these dirt driveways we covered with wood chips. Game changer for the whole space of the farm. There's that hoop house in the background. I don't know if you can see it. Just looking gorgeous on that old field. You can see our bat box is way out there, and that's our barnyard. But this is the field now, right? Look at this. This is beautiful. This is all no-till. This is all broad forked. These 2 beds of tomatoes. We got 200 pounds just today off of 2 beds of tomatoes. They're the healthiest freaking tomatoes you ever seen. These are beautiful eggplants. And what I really love to do is to come in here and I'm just like, look at what the in-betweens look like. Do you see all of that cover? Just all of that from like weed whack. We can no longer weed whack. That's okay. Things are kind of like, it's kind of serving as their own mulch. Right? Like it's thick, it's beautiful. There's so much going on in here. And what I really love about the no-till are all of the volunteers that you start getting, which sometimes are chaotic. I'm not gonna lie, sometimes the chaos can like interfere with it better too. But honestly, I'm willing to make some sacrifices for like these beautiful amaranth beings that I'm so grateful we didn't plant a single one of these. We also didn't plant a single one of these flowers or the sunflowers. They just came back. Same thing with this kanya, this corn looking crop is a sweet sorghum. And we just kind of leave them wherever they're not kind of bothering everybody else, right? And then what's sweet is now we see so many more birds. We see so many more wildlife. And we see so many more insects. The soil, like the plants are just yielding more. Like I keep my harvest log and everything. And the soil is just yielding so much more. We get bigger harvests every year. And Isabel, you were actually here right after I flipped the beds, I think when Heinrich was visiting, Senator Heinrich was visiting, these beds were completely unplanted. When you got here, I just flipped them. And then like, look at these freaking beautiful, healthy zucchini. What is that? We had a Rob plant go to see. We got some volunteer Rob. How fun is that? The dill, we didn't plant any of that dill. It's amazing. I don't know if any of you read Fukuoka, Masanobu Fukuoka. He's like a Japanese farmer philosopher. He like advocates this whole lazy farming method, which I was like, I don't really get. I have no idea what he's talking about. This year I see like we have some volunteers. We have all these carrot flowers. That's what these white flowers over here are. We have all these carrot flowers, so they go to seed. They attract all these wonderful beneficial insects like wasps and beetles and all these things. And then they go to seed. And then next year, our weeds are carrots. They're like not the nasty. We had all these goat heads and Johnson grass and all this stuff. Our weeds are carrots now, to where these onion beds were.
Whoops, we're losing you, Casey.
I was like, should onions had over because we're allowing things to actually come back instead of reading it to shreds. Am I back?
Yes.
Get closer to the house.
You're back. You sped up like Donald Duck. You might want to go a little bit back to the house. Plant. Yeah. Thank you. Awesome tour.
We don't want you to stop. It's been so exciting to see all of the developments. It's really amazing and so inspiring. Thank you for sharing, Casey.
Absolutely.
We do welcome people to ask questions in the chat or make comments in the chat, and we'll give you a chance to ask in person. So first of all, Mark asked, how do you plant if you're not tilling?
Yeah, I love that. So that was honestly, Mark, one of my biggest fears, I think, when I started. And I invested, and I love this investment. It's not for everyone, but I'm so glad. I invested in like a yang cedar, like one of those Korean, really specialty, like 3 tine. It was pretty expensive, but it was so worth it. And the time saved cedars. And I was like, oh my gosh, if I don't have these like beautiful, fluffy beds, how will this cedar handle all this debris? And what I realized is, first off, the yang was way more tough than I gave it credit for, right? Like, so if I'm doing my lettuce mix or my carrots or what have you, like, honestly, most of the time the debris just kind of like glides through and is not interfering with the distribution of the seeds. Like we did all of our spring seeding that was like cutting greens and roots and all of that with the yang cedar. And it really wasn't that much of an issue, which was so sweet. And on the rare occasion that the flail mower wasn't able to like chop up old stalks of something enough, literally just a quick leaf rake over the bed, right? To like kind of just shoo off, just kind of brush off some of those things that would interfere with the cedar was it. And when you're transplanting plugs, right? Like the plugs don't care if there's some like bigger chunks of leaves or different shredded things and stuff or whatnot to deal with. You can just kind of plant as you would with plugs. And honestly, every year I lean more to wanting to do the transplants and the plugs and everything, because I just really, first off, I love greenhouse work, but also it just like makes more sense with some of the things I'm doing, because I'm also trying to like learn how to prioritize human bodies in the work. And a lot of times those like tightly condensed seeding things that you do take a lot more hand weeding, take a lot more intensive labor, that when you are able to plant with plugs, you can get more like hand tools and stuff in there to just kind of like save your back a bit. So that's been something I've been creating with. But yeah, it feels weird, it feels strange, but honestly, it's not as tough as maybe even I thought it would be back when I had transitioned to doing more of this like no-till natural farming.
Hey, Mark, did you have a follow-up question about that, or did Casey answer your question?
No, that's good. That was very informative.
Perfect. Thanks for your question and your answer, Casey. And Design is asking, is it all drip irrigated?
So we kind of do a fusion. Mostly everything vegetable wise that we grow is under drip irrigation. We do utilize the flood irrigation for our perennial pasture, and then also And I just really wish y'all could see this, but it's probably a little too far away from the house. We have this freaking beautiful, I call it our heritage field, but honestly, I'm like, that is like the real OG field of blue corn and tepary beans and gourds and chile and all these sunflowers and Mexican sunflowers and stuff. So that is all purely on acequia, and it's doing so well with the no-till, even having only gotten 3 irrigations plus this fantastic monsoon. Hey, her previously, plus this fantastic monsoon we've been getting. It's doing so incredibly well. And we kind of utilize the different irrigation methods in different seasons. So I really love being able to give even my primary vegetable fields, if I'm able to, a good flood irrigation. It just helps like flush the salts, helps create that store of water underneath. That's really nice. Sprinkler culture is really hard out here, particularly in the open fields. It just doesn't quite work as well as like those folks and those celebrity farmers in Canada. I'm sure it works great up there, but like out here in the desert, it's just like too freaking hot on a daily basis for that little sprinkler to really do anything. So I don't do much sprinklers, but we don't really need it either. Honestly, the drip and the acequia is like plenty.
And Design was saying that theirs is overrun with thistle. Do you have any advice?
Like the Russian thistle.
Well, we can welcome them to ask their question on directly if they'd like to unmute.
Yeah, hey, thanks. And I just have to say, this is fantastic. I love your passion and what you showed us. I'm so like inspired. We're really just starting out, and the property is, because we're just recently acquired, and it is totally overrun with Russian thistle and prairie dogs.
Yeah.
So we have a lot of stuff to start with and to start amending. So our thought was to start in the fall, spring, whatever, to mow that down and at least start planting hopefully some cover crop and maybe some tall grass that might be able to battle the thistle. I don't know.
100%. Yeah. When you're dealing with weeds like that, and I think that was kind of the gift of the Sudan grass, is it's such a fast grower. Like it's so fast, it's so strong that even like the pigweed has a hard time keeping up, right? That it really just, if you get a really nice cover crop, and I think the general guideline that I like to follow is like 4 times the amount of whatever the seed pack, whatever the cover crop bag says. If you're trying to compete with weeds, like you got to plant 4 times that amount in order to really create that like thick mass of stuff you want to ward off the stuff you don't want.
Well, we've heard to do like at least like 7 types of cover crop to like just try to really get it as broad as can be, I guess.
Totally, especially when you're dealing with unknowns. I may have been just very lucky with my pure Sudan grass mix that I threw in, that it was like perfectly timed or something. They did all get planted within like 2 months of each other, so there was a little bit of a time window that went into it. But the more I learn too, the more I'm like, oh, but it could have been more mixed, and that probably would have been a good thing too, and like provide all this extra juicy earth goodness to the cover crop material that went on after. So heck yeah, I'm just like, plant away. And I briefly did see a picture of like, where was that place? So it's called Enchanted Seeds or something like that, is Kevin's custom mix seed company. And then also, I mean, like Johnny Seeds has good cover crop mixes. High Mowing has some good cover crop mixes. Heck, even Haas Tools, where I got a really cool push pull hoe this year that I'm in love with, has some good cover crop seeds. So you can get cover crop seeds just about anywhere, but Kevin himself with Enchanted Seeds is like particularly knowledgeable and like very creating this like beautiful 13 plant custom mix for me that I would recommend.
Jake Bracken had a question about that, and so I'm glad you addressed it, Casey. And back to Sylvia, we wanted to make sure she had a chance to make a comment. She was really inspired by your presentation. And if you want to unmute Sylvia, please join us.
Oh, Casey, you are really a poetic farmer. It's wonderful to listen to you. You are a storyteller. Those are the best farmers there are, the poets and the storytellers. So you got it, girl. Your farm is really, truly amazing, and your work is so wonderful. It's really inspiring. And so I'm just so happy for you. I really am. And it makes me happy too. I wanted to ask you about a couple of things. One was about that. It looked like a little midget tractor that you
Oh.
showed. What the heck is that? What's the name of that?
Yeah, okay. So that's called a BCS.
A what?
I don't know what that stands for. BCS. B is in boy, I guess.
BCS.
C is in
Okay.
Casey, S is in Sam. Yeah, it is called a walk behind tractor.
Walk behind. Okay.
Yeah, and they are kind of pricey, not gonna lie. Like the BCS, which is the core machine, plus well, the flail mower is like $2,400, and the power harrow is also that much. The tiller's only $800, which I needed at first, and then now I'm like, I'll sell it to you for real cheap. Yeah, so it's kind of like the core is like 2,500, and then all the implements, it's just like a tractor where you then get all the
Yeah.
implements. What's really amazing is that one of my co-farmers, Reina Bantia with Suya Farm, she was able to get a grant that helped her buy a BCS and a couple
Yeah,
implements.
that's wonderful. I want to get a grant. I
Yeah.
have my father's tractor. It's a Massey Ferguson. I love it. It's fantastic.
Oh yeah. Which,
And
to be real,
you know, I
that
was able
first
to get it
field setting
partially
would have been
fixed. I was able to
impossible
get it
without a real
partially
tractor.
fixed, but
Yeah.
but not entirely. And so I'm looking also for some grant money to finish fixing it. I mean,
Totally.
those things last forever. They're really amazing. The other
They
thing I
do.
wanted
And
to
now,
ask you,
honestly, like, I think when you're dealing with raw land like that on such grand scale, the initial setting of being able to have a friend with a full-size tractor come, like, you do kind of need to reset or actually rip it. Like when it's been over tractored, sometimes a tractor, like that's what we did out here was I have a friend who does like some custom tractor work, and I was like, you got to come and you got to rip it, you got to disc it, you got to like set it. And then from then on out, no more freaking tractors ever again. But it was really important to completely reset the field. And now the only work I have for him, which is really sweet, is he just comes and he's like my glorified mulch mover. He just like pushes the wood chips everywhere on the driveways, which is like so sweet. I'm like, you're not allowed in the fields anymore. So I think a tractor is a very useful initial tool to get some of the larger scale field wide work that you have to done. And then you can transition to some of the smaller tools that really then will help you focus on that smaller
I
scale.
actually like say with my tractor, I use it to help me get out in the wintertime when it snows. You know, I use the blade to
Oh
get
yeah, that makes
myself
sense. Yeah, totally a plow.
out of being,
Yeah.
snowed in. And then I also use it to mow. Sometimes I use it for mowing.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, totally.
And then I use the discs, and then sometimes, and I was able to reset a field really beautifully. It's doing spectacularly well. So for certain things, it does come in handy. And then that other piece I thought was really interesting, that four-pronged thing.
The broad fork.
Yeah, the broad fork.
Yeah.
Yeah, that looks like that's totally from another planet. I've never seen one of
It
those.
totally is. It's like such a surreal tool. Yeah, we had one of my co-farmers was like doing the merengue while she was like wiggling it down into the earth. We had like so much fun with that every season. It's like such intense work, and it's so worth it. And you can like really just blast on some music and like really dance with it.
That sounds
And
great.
be
I
doing
have a
your field work in the
dancer.
meantime.
That would work.
Yeah, definitely trying to figure out how to add more
I
ritual into our work.
I did want to know if it will, my soil's really rocky. Do you think it would work in my kind of soil if it has like kind of?
It is a little funny with the rocks. Like sometimes, you know, it's like I have the 18-inch long one or something. So it's like, you know, you're 18 inches in and you hit a rock. It really depends. It really depends. You could get a smaller one, or by the time you've gotten to the place where no-till makes sense, it might not be as much of an issue anymore. Because part of the work that I've done too is like every time you find a big rock like that, throw them in the big rock pile. And now I use the big rock pile to like hold down my insect netting and stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I actively cultivated that from the field in the setting process before we were really growing.
Yeah.
It was like the very first harvest, so to speak, those big rocks.
Well, I look forward someday to meeting you and seeing your amazing farm, and I wish you, I am so delighted. It's so wonderful. You really honor farming and farmers. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sylvia. I agree. And those are great questions. And I wanted to give a chance for Jeremy P. to ask a question to Casey or two, because he had a few thoughts, if he wants to unmute.
Yes, yes. Thank you for the presentation tonight. It's amazing. I love hearing about local people in New Mexico. I live in Socorro, and so we started with just dead dirt where nothing grew at all.
Yeah.
And now that we've been incorporating some soil organic matter and we've been cover cropping in a few places, we have pigweed, Palmer's amaranth, and goat head, just the just taking over everything. And I wondered if you had any of those kind of weed problems, pressures, and how you dealt with them, and if you did, do you think cover cropping to choke them out would be sufficient, or do we need to do
Yeah,
more?
it's a balance, definitely. I think we do definitely have those weeds. And the initial year, just that thick, heavy cover cropping really helped those like first flushes, like just overseeding, like I was saying, and really just like choking them out and feeding them with something that was so fast growing, right? Like the perennials wouldn't really be helpful there because they take so much time to establish, but things like buckwheat and the rye and things, they just like, once they're up, they're like, boom, I'm up. And it's like all me, it's an us party. I do think long-term weed strategy management, and I remember reading this like one, and I was just laughing so hard. I was like, this woman got this book author so hard. They were asking her the same question, this indigenous woman. It was like, indigenous farming, and they were like, how do you deal with that? And she was just like, you pull the weeds when they're young. And I was just like, yep, that's it.
That's one of the hardest things it's been to keep up with is now.
I mean, they grow like 20 feet in a day. I hear you. And like sometimes what we do, honestly, when like, I mean, this time of year, it's like all I can do to just keep up with like keeping food from going to waste. It's like pulling out of the field, that we will literally just be like, okay, we have the next hour and a half of just like a targeted attack, seek and destroy all of these seeding pigweeds and stuff.
Yeah.
And just like pull them out. And I think the gift of also having the livestock that we have now, we have goats and sheep and chickens and stuff, is we just have like these big wheelbarrows that we throw in all these seeding ones that are getting away from us as we see them. I'm like, you just made yourself a target, son, there with your seed head. Is that the goats and everything freaking love it. They go bananas. It like helps me with my feed costs, but it is like a struggle. Like I think just over time too with the no-till, because I'm not actively inverting the soil and uncovering millions of more seeds. I mean, did you know one of those pigweeds, if it goes to full seed, can do over 5 million future pigweeds?
Yes.
It's like, what? That is absurd, right? So it's like, it's just going to be a thing. But I think year after year, if you keep on it, you cover crop your blank areas, that way there is some competition there. Do your targeted attacks as you can of the ones that are starting to go to seed. You will miss some, I can definitely, particularly with the no-till, read the story of the field, so to speak. I'm like, right, first thing of the spring, I'm like, oh yeah, that was one I missed right there. Look at that little circle, that perfect circle of pigweed that came up. Like, well, shoot, I wish I had gotten that one. But overall, like, it does reduce. And I think too, that's part of why I'm valuing our bodies more with spacing and stuff, is I find things like these push-pull hoes, which is a tool that I'm just like so in love with right now. It's like a manual. It's like what a stirrup hoe wished it was. That then you're like, okay, actually I can like really cleverly get in there real quick and just like mass. They're gonna write about this to their ancestors because I'm just murdering them all right now. It's like it's so sweet in that way. Push-pull hoe. Yeah, that's like my favorite new tool. Hey Tanya.
Okay, I'm gonna Google that. I've never heard of that. That's one I'll have to check that out.
Yeah, it's nice and it's handy and you can get in between things. But then you start finding the tools too where you're like, okay, it's on. Cultivate early, cultivate often, as they say. Now I really understand that. Get the weeds when they're young.
Yeah, that. That was another thing is we have We have chickens and rabbits, but we don't have any animals any bigger than that yet to incorporate into
Oh, the
our
chickens too in the
Yeah.
winter. I invested in some fencing that way I could just protect our perennials area. But the chickens are so good at getting pests and stuff too. If you just let them have free reign over the field over the winter, if you don't have any predation issues during the day. There's just like one hawk that I watch and it goes after a chicken now and again in broad daylight. And I'm like, what the heck? But otherwise during the day we do okay. And they've really been helpful too, I think, in helping clear some of that as well. And I just got ducks, which I'm really excited for some of their weed eating potential.
Do the ducks eat pigweed? Do you think they'll target pigweed?
They'll eat the seeds. That's what I've noticed. They eat the seed heads. So they don't eat the plants, but they eat the seed heads.
That would be amazing because right now my chickens will eat the leaves, but they leave the seed head.
Yeah,
So-
a polyculture in the animal world and in the plant world, it's looking like is
Yeah.
really the key to success here.
Yes. Okay. We'll see that. Thank you. Then we might incorporate some ducks, and we'll just keep on the pulling. We really were wanting something that'll deal with the weeds that already have seed heads on them because
Totally.
pull them
It's
and
such
then-
a pain. I mean, there's all these different strategies. We could do a whole different session on like weed strategies, but where people, sometimes I'll put the drip lines on first before planting, let all the weeds come up, hoe them off, hoe them dead, and then plant. And that like really helps set us up for success. There's all different things you can do,
yeah, just add
but
some
the
bottom.
weeds nonstop. That's a struggle of life, man. I hear you.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we'll thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
We'll look at some ducks and we'll just keep pulling weeds.
Yeah, that's it.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Thank you.
And we're winding down, but we still have a few more questions. Design was saying, how did you mulch? Was it layering wood chip with compost?
Yeah, so in our non-growing areas, we did mulch with wood chips. In the field, the wood chips, I think, are more of a hindrance than a help, unfortunately. So literally that mulch that I was kind of showing y'all on the video, all that mulch is literally just previous year's biomass added back onto the field, right? It's just whatever was there, unless it's a giant weed seed head, we leave it, we mow it, we leave it there. So that's just like a few years of really intentional re-adding every little thing back on it that is now the mulch of our paths in the garden. Mhm.
Amy Larson chimed in. I just wanted to know if she had a question for you, or was she just wanting to help answer one of the questions in the chat? I just wanted to give her a chance.
Oh, thank you. No, I don't have any questions. I agree with everybody who was chiming in about how inspiring and how much I appreciated your love of your land and the relationship you have with your farm. It's just wonderful. So I really wanted to echo everybody who I think felt that as well. So thank you.
Thank you.
Someone who has their hand up, is that you, Isabel?
Yeah, I was wondering, Casey, if you wanted to share some of your water savings that I think you've tracked out pretty good, that with better soil health, you've been able to really save on the water needs for your farm.
Yeah, I mean, as the organic matter has increased, I've been currently needed to irrigate less, which is really sweet. I mean, that's in tandem both with the drip irrigation and with the flood irrigation. I just think having that, the living paths, right, is huge. Having that like self-created mulched paths has been really huge. Whereas like on these 90-degree days, I would normally have to water every single day. We've been able to go down to like every third day now and have like the same results, which is really sweet. And then like with the perennial cover crop, like establishing it, definitely if you are trying to do that in a space, you want to be able to give it the water it needs to just start growing, right? Even like really drought resistant native plants, they all need like a really good monsoon season, we'll call it, in order to survive. That's the same thing with your perennial cover crop seeds. You want to make sure that you're doing it early in the season when we typically have a little more water availability. That way they can get established. But then now, I mean, like we didn't get our first flood irrigation until almost the end of April this year, and our perennial cover crop field was like green. It was like still growing. It wasn't like as thriving as it would have been had we had a good flood irrigation on it, but like it was still there. And sometimes I'll like just sit out there and like trip on it, just be like, wow, how like deep these grass roots grow that they're like growing now. They must be like 20 feet down. Like I have no idea. I've recently learned that maybe that's not an exaggeration, which blows my mind. I wish I had soil glasses or whatever, X-ray vision. But to where now, even with only 3 irrigations, I think is total the amount of water we were allotted for this whole season other than the rains. It's like, wow, actually that's like really good. It's like lush, it's thriving, it's loving it. Our corn is like 10 feet tall, you know, it's only got 3 irrigations. But that's because it's not dry. Like dry, bare soil just evaporates immediately. It gets hot. It's like releasing all of it. It's just like it's gone. But when it's alive, it's like kind of creating these like little microclimates where in the morning there's dew, even though we haven't watered, even though it hasn't rained. Like it's so sweet.
Thank you, Isabel. Thank you, Casey. I just wanted to note that Griette J said how super of an informative presentation you gave, Casey, and thank you so much for sharing your many efforts, experience, and your clear love and passion. And so that was spoken so nicely. And as we come to the final part of the hour, before Isabel gives the announcement about next month, I wanted to ask you, Casey, is there anything else you want to close with? Because we really do appreciate you and your time.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I do just want to maybe just speak to the importance of building that relationship with place. I mean, particularly as like a white settler farmer on stolen land, it's like such a process to like really be like, what does it mean to be in right relation with this place? And no matter what your history is on this land, I think honoring it and just giving back. Like we don't want to always just have this extractive relationship with the place that we're on that is so toxic. That's capitalism. That's like literally everything that's destroying us right now, is this idea of how much can we get, right? It's like, actually, how much can I give to you because you reciprocate that in all these beautiful ways. Like we are interdependent, and trying to bring, I think one of my goals, particularly this year, I'm really trying to settle into that, is how to welcome the species. Like that may be like a little woo woo for some people, but like genuinely you can tell when you walk onto a space when it like is happy, when it like, again, with like what feels good, and try when it doesn't, when it's been abused, when it's been mistreated, and trying to just follow that and then like honor that and like name that and then create those spaces too where you can like leave offerings and things, I think are huge in a way that feels genuine and true to you, where it is that like just gratitude. Because I think too, like our intention shapes the world, right? And that's like what we're doing when we're doing agriculture. That's like literally our most powerful thing as human beings, is what we do. So to not undervalue that and to not just come at it like, well, I need X amount of yield, Y amount of yield, all these things. Like, yeah, we do, you know, I have, you know, bills to pay. I agree. I have a crew that I need to pay. And when we only focus on what we take, we'll actually be destroying ourselves in the long run. Where if we really build on that reciprocity with all of the more than human beings on the space, it just is, I'm like exponential. I'm like 200 pounds today off of 2 80-foot tomato beds. Like, what is that? I've never experienced yields like that. Literally, it's just because like we're treating her right. And she's like, thank you. And I'm like, thank you. Like, what can I give you in return? Like, that's exactly, you know what I mean? Like, that's just really what I want to encourage in people, is that relationship and place-basedness.
Wow. Thank you so much. That was powerful and amazing. And with that, I just wish everybody a wonderful rest of the evening. Thanks again to Casey. Thanks to all of you for being here. It was a great hour. We've learned so much and shared a lot. Thanks so much.
Thank you.